Welcome back to the Health 3.0 podcast, where the innovators of the future of healthcare share insights that you need to take control of your health today. Today, I'm interviewing Dr. Pam Peeke. Dr. Peeke is a wealth of knowledge and has been in the healthcare space for women's health, specifically for many, many years. She shares a lot of her journey today. And if you are a woman who is looking for a little hope, a bright future when it comes to healthcare and medicine and the future of medicine for women, this will be a great podcast for you to listen to. Welcome to the Health 3.0 podcast, brought to you by LifeMD, where we explore the way healthcare is delivered and talk about what it actually takes to optimize your health today. I'm Dr. Doug Lucas, your host and VP of Hormone and Health Optimization at LifeMD. Join me every Tuesday when I sit down with innovators, disruptors, and clinicians who are redefining what's possible in modern medicine. You can listen on your favorite podcast player or watch the episodes on YouTube. Let's get started. All right, welcome, Dr. Pam Peeke, to the Health 3.0 podcast. So glad to have you here. And what I'd love to do is actually just talk a little bit about, in your words, what makes you qualified to talk about the history of women's health?
Okay, well, first of all, Doug, I love to play in your sandbox. So I'm really looking forward to this. Way too much fun. All right, what makes me qualified? Because I lived through it. Because I am a physician scientist trained at the National Institutes of Health at the exact same time that the Office of Women's Health Research was established, and their director became one of my best friends. So I was there. Oh my goodness gracious. And at the same time, my street cred includes my other degrees, which allow me to look at the entire evolution of women's health from different lenses. So I have a double master's in public health and public policy. So here I am looking at it from policy. Here I am looking at it from public health. And then as a physician, adding another dimension on a one-to-one. How you doing out there, sister? What's going on? And at the same time, I'm a published clinical investigator trained at the NIH, and I've had a chance to be able to see what it's like to be able to try to publish this type of research. It's not easy because many times our work is held to a different standard because it's new and it's innovative. I can also tell you that in the final dimension, which is I wear my Wall Street hat, when you try to get funding for a new startup in the field of women's health, and I work in feminine technology, good luck. It's very hard for a host of reasons. And so, I've been slugging it out at multiple levels, and it's been an extraordinary adventure.
Wow. Well, there are so many pieces there that I want to dig into, but maybe let's go back in time. Let's start when you started in medicine. Where did you actually start? What was your initiation into the medical field?
Well, it's kind of funny. My initiation was in high school. I went to one of the geek high schools in San Francisco. It's one of the top public high schools in the United States. It's called Lowell. And I remember everyone there was pre-something. So you just walked around, like, what are you? Oh, I'm pre-architecture. I'm pre-law. And I never really gave it a second thought. I just, hung out. And loved everything. They had more advanced placement classes than they had regular classes. So I was surrounded by my fellow geeks. We were so geeked out, we didn't even have a football team. That's how bad it was. So in my senior year, the senior yearbook guy shows up and he looks at me and he says, "So what do I put under your name?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You got to be pre-something. Come on now." And I said, okay. And he said, "Well, what do you like?" And I said, "I love science and math and people." He goes, "Doctor." I said, "Okay, we'll go with it." So that's how much thought went into becoming a pre-med. And then by the time I got to Berkeley, which is where I did my undergrad and grad before med school, Um, I was kind of cruising along doing the pre med thing, and everyone knows the grind, but it wasn't enough for me because I'm also an outdoor athlete. And I just kept hanging out, with people who started a new word at Berkeley, and it was called ecology. And so I asked for permission to do a double major. And so I was pre med, cellular emphasis biology. And then the other half of me, feeling a little schizophrenic here, was conservation of natural resources. And we became eventually the number one department of that in the United States. It's now called environmental sciences. So I was out, hanging out with sick Monterey Pines. And then I was out hanging out with my human biology and bringing it all together. And that's how it was just exciting because I put it together myself. No one told me what to do.
So then, so then fast forward a little bit through, through medical school, through training. What was your initial practice like?
So my initial practice was interesting. I'm board certified in internal medicine, but I never did it. It was too boring. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. But I just couldn't do that. I go fast. You know this, Doug. So instead, I went into critical care. And, basically what we now look at is sort of more intensive care, critical care. And I loved that. And here's where an awakening happened, Doug, and you'll love this. So here I am in the beginning of my training. Here I'm standing in the ICU, and they come up and they go, "Well, Dr. Peak, you know, where are your orders for the parenteral nutrition for this, particular patient?" I said, "The what?" Um, because we never learned nutrition in medical school. Neither did you. Nope, nothing. Nor did we learn physical activity, but we'll get to that. So, I just sort of like, uh-oh, we're in trouble here. So I learned everything from the registered dietitians in the ICU. And eventually, after a number of years of practicing like this, I thought, this is really stupid. I would love to get back into academia and learn more. So that's what I did. I left that behind me and it became a Pew Foundation scholar in nutrition and metabolism back home at the University of California, this time at Davis, which is the largest doctoral program in the country in nutrition. And I stumbled into it out of just sheer necessity. It's like, come on, teach me something here for crying out loud. And I'm still ranting and raving. Like all across the country, wherever I can, I'm telling medical schools, you've got to make this a required course, not some elective. But you see, to this day, it's still not on the boards. And so if it's not on the boards,
It's not in the
nobody
classroom.
prioritizes.
And when you
Yeah.
went through, I mean, the my experience with dietetics, my wife is an RD. I employ lots of registered dietitians, and my experience is that the training that they go through is very different than the the language that you and I are speaking about nutrition now. Was that true for you back then? Did it make sense to you what they were teaching, or were you so new to the whole space that you didn't know the difference at the time?
There were two things going on. It's an excellent question, Doug. The first one is, what do you do in an ICU room? That's a whole different ballgame. Here's my prerogative: keep them alive. Keep them alive. So I'm squirting all kinds of good things in them through a central line, and I'm trying to make certain they stay alive while they're healing in the ICU, perioperatively, or whatever's going on. Then when I got to Davis to do the Pew Foundation postdoc, it became, well, these people, who are coming in are metabolically off. Okay, they're maybe overweight, type 2 diabetes, I could go on. Now what do you do? It's not, and now I have to keep them alive at a very different level. It's like, I want you to be here, 30 years from now. And how are we going to do that? And it was a different algorithm in many respects. And so for me, it was a real awakening. I had a lot to learn. because people don't realize nutrition is hardcore biochemistry. You got to know what you're doing here. You can't just sort of read prevention magazine and then pick it up from. No, you got to know what you're doing, especially if you're a physician who is doing the recommendations and back and forth. So my learning curve was straight up to the ceiling, and that's where I got that awakening.
Yeah. And so then how did that change? Did that change you in the critical care setting? Or did your career shift at that point into another type of practitioner?
It's very interesting. While I was at Davis, uh, something also hit me. My ears and eyes are always open. And that is that I found that stress, elevated levels of stress hormone cortisol were highly associated, with sickness and metabolic sickness. And I fell in love with cortisol. And lo and behold, at the National Institutes of Health, I was invited to become a senior research fellow with one of the top stress researchers in the world, George Crusos. And so I bagged the whole critical care thing because I didn't need that anymore. I now was becoming much more academic, and I was fascinated, and I wanted to do some of my own research in this. And what better place than the NIH? So I was deeply honored. And so I went 3,000 miles away to come to the NIH and to join George's lab, where we helped put together the stress fat connection. And this was when the metabolic syndrome wasn't called that yet. It was called Syndrome X.
Yeah. I
And
remember those
then
days.
yeah, remember? And then it moved over to metabolic syndrome when they realized, rutro, it's like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, the whole schmear, was associated with metabolic syndrome. My fascination was fat, intra-abdominal fat, visceral fat. What's up with that? Why is that when it becomes too excessive so lethal? And so we were studying a model, Cushing syndrome, which is it's a somewhat rare syndrome with a benign tumor that occurs in your pituitary gland or on your adrenal glands and sometimes other places too. What's the bottom line? It just keeps squirting out stress hormone.
Cortisol.
And
Yeah.
oh man, but here's the funny thing. In the world of endocrinology, which is where I was living at the time at the NIH, we knew that people who have endocrinopathies, problems with endocrine issues, look funny. We always knew that they just look funny. There's something that's going to go on. So these people with too much stress hormone developed what? Huge amount of belly fat. And meanwhile, their arms and legs are little skinny things, so they look like pumpkins. And I went into the operating room with the neurosurgeons, and I grabbed some of that fat and I studied it in my laboratory. And that's when we began to put together the pieces of the puzzle that when you have high levels of stress hormone, there's no question that it increases the development of visceral fat. So there's your stress fat connection.
Well, and I want to pause on that for just a second because I think most people still misunderstand true visceral fat from what is sub-Q fat around the abdomen. And I'm using technical terms, so let's make it more simple, right? So when you look at somebody that has a quote unquote beer belly, there's kind of two ways that this could happen, right? So you can have a lot of what's called subcutaneous fat, meaning it's outside of the layer of the muscle, versus what's inside the layer of the muscle that's actually wrapped around your organs. So give me more about the difference between these two types of fat.
Well, the subcutaneous fat, this is your pinch and inch fat. So grab your hands and, just come on down to your belly and grab it. Now, it used to be pinch an inch. It's more like pinch a mile now, but, there you have it. And if you want to really see what this is all about, lay on your back next to a mirror and then look over at the mirror. What you're going to see is that if you have mostly subcutaneous fat, and that is fat that is cushioning underneath the skin. It's just cushioning and it lays on top of your abdominal muscle, your rectus abdominis, right? So if you lay down and most of what you have is just this pinch and inch stuff, then it'll all kind of blip to the side and you'll actually flatten out and it'll look, okay, well, that's not so bad. Um, if you have a significant amount of visceral fat, when you lay down on your back and look over at the mirror, it didn't go anywhere. It's like you swallowed a bowling ball. And that's where you run into problem because visceral fat is very important for us in appropriate amounts. So it lays below the abdominal muscle, the rectus abdominis. So in surgery, it actually looks different. It looks like beige fat, whereas subcutaneous fat is yellow. So when you cut yourself accidentally and it's kind of deep, look, you'll see, in addition to the blood, you'll see
That
yellow.
that is deep. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of getting there, right? If you accidentally hit cut yourself, but the stuff deep inside looks more beige, and it actually looks like an abdominal apron, is what it's been called, and it's really important. I mean, fat is an endocrine organ and it does some very important things for us. It's just that it's too much of a good thing. That's when you run into problems. And that's when you bump up what we call inflammation throughout the body. And inflammation is the foundation of disease, whether it's, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, whatever.
So if the visceral fat is, let's call it connected to cortisol, I think it's, and the medical system is interesting and research. And I've seen a lot of things researched the way that you thought about it in the laboratory, which is you find an extreme example, right? So Cushing's disease, really high levels of cortisol for an extended period of time, and it results in this phenotype, this look, right? Um, how can we then relate that though to people who don't have that disease, right? Because like you said, it's rare. But many of us struggle, if not all of us, struggle with a lot of stress. But is that enough? Like, is the daily stress of like me and my three kids and my businesses and my patients, like, is that stress enough to start laying down more visceral fat?
Excellent question. So, this is the whole reason why I did that research. You always have to have some kind of medical model. So, we use the Cushing's people because they were easy. They're coming in with, a tsunami of cortisol on board. And whenever you study anything, you want something a little more extreme to kind of drive home the point. Well, here's the gig. As soon as my research started coming out and I started publishing, oh my gosh. So USA Today shows up at the front door and they go, wait, what, stress fat connection? And what's that about? Because they never knew any of this was going on. And I said, there is absolutely no question that when you have elevated levels of cortisol in your body on a chronic basis, I'm saying chronic. So if I went behind you right now, Doug, and I went, boo, kind of like freaked you out for a moment. There you go. All right. Well, what are you going to do? Your cortisol level's going to go up for a minute because you got a little momentary fight and flight, like, what's going on? And then as soon as you realize, haha, it's just Pam, then it calms down. That's what fight and flight was meant for. And it's meant to be able to keep you at a heightened level of alertness. You look at any elite athlete and you can see what they do. They're just like all fight and flight. They're like, come on down. If it's a windy day at Wimbledon or whatever the issue is, they're on it. Okay. But what happens is when people go through life, and this is where I really emphasize what goes on in a woman's life, because I like to be very gender specific in this case because there hasn't been enough research in women. And so, like I just stand on my little soapbox here and I always try to twist it around and nuance it to gender specific. So here's a woman who's holding down two jobs, is maybe a solo mom, and she's getting, a paucity of sleep. And then we're going to throw in the fact that she's also perimenopausal, which means sleep is all but a past dream. Um, and she's got a troublesome teenager or kid or whatever the issue may be. Her boss is an idiot, and she's putting up with toxicity right and left, right? So would you say that she has stress? The answer is yes. The question is, how is she responding to it? If she's responding to it with helplessness, hopelessness, and defeat, keep that in mind. Helplessness, hopelessness, and defeat. Then what happens is her cortisol level stays up. And then here's what happens. And Doug, this is so cool, and I want to make sure people understand this. You burn out. And so normally the what happens with cortisol is it should be high in the morning. It's waking you up with its best friend, norepinephrine. So that's your little adrenaline thing. So you got adrenaline hanging out with cortisol, both, associated with one another throughout the entire day. So it's up. You wake up, you're like, hey, let me attack the day. And then it starts coming down until right about 5 o'clock ish. Okay. And then it starts to want to level out because you're supposed to, I use heavy emphasis on you're supposed to be kind of winding things down. Because naturally that's what a cave woman would do. To be winding things down. It's like, okay, I've done the hunting and foraging, I'm done for the day. I got my little nuts with me for the morning. We're good. Okay. But that's not what happens. What happens is, we take on our second life. We're taking care of the family and we just got home and we dragged ourselves through the front door and all the rest of it. So you never really see that beautiful, what we call a sinusoidal curve. It doesn't happen. It looks like a kind of backwards S. And instead, it's up and down all the time. And when it does that, it interferes with everything metabolically, everything. And then you do that long enough, we have actually measured what happens to those curves. And by the way you do the measurements is you take multiple blood samples throughout the day. Only in research do you do this. And what we were able to find was literally that sinusoidal curve became flat, completely flat. It was like nothing could get you going, not even a front end loader. And that's what happens. You never want that to happen, but it happens in so many people every day as they kind of struggle through the day. And women feel this especially.
So let me ask you this, because this is an area where, I've dealt with this a lot, in my own specialty of bone health. We talk a lot about cortisol. It has a negative impact on bone as well, for a lot of the same reasons, same underlying pathology. But women especially, and I totally agree with the scenario that you just laid out, extremely common in today's society. But women ask, and we have an answer, but I want to know your answer. How do you know if you are in a state where your cortisol is still elevated versus if you have gotten to the point where you really no longer produce it at any appreciable amount? How can someone know where they are in that spectrum?
Okay, you can't say it doesn't get secreted. Without cortisol, you're dead. That's called Addison syndrome. So that's when the adrenals no longer generate cortisol. So cortisol is absolutely life saving. Cortisol is necessary for life. What the correct way of actually looking at this is what has happened to that curve, the natural circadian curve for cortisol, given the level of stress that this individual is experiencing. So if what I would do with someone is say, okay, hit the pause button right now, sister. Okay. And you're now going to look at a stress survey. Okay. Let's see where you are. Right? How much sleep are you getting again? Uh-huh. And how are your numbers looking metabolically? Uh-huh. So your glucose is way up and your belly fat is up and you're sedentary. In other words, you have no outlets and whatever. And then you ask why why things are looking a little dismal. It's because you're living in a chronic pro-inflammatory state. So it's setting you up for disaster. So the way to turn it around is to begin to, as it were, de-stress. What are those things that you can do in your life to inject some way to de-stress? Let me give you an example that you'll love. I did my residency training at George Washington University. And at that time, when I was on call, I had two beepers. One was the usual beeper, the one. So those were hits from the ER, and we'd have to admit somebody, right? The other one was, the code beeper. And if that baby went off, someone is desperately trying to die on me. And so I'm going to have to run like hell and, activate everything we have to be able to help that person. Okay. So you walk around like that. Can you imagine? So you lived through it. I lived through it. And that level of baseline stress. So what I would do, I felt in me, I don't know about you, Doug, but I'll put money on it. You felt the same thing. One of the things that really helped me was physical movement, and it tamped it down. And by generating those wonderful how shall I say, brain chemicals that people know so well, it calmed me. So what I did was I worked a deal with the janitor, and he unlocked the cardiac rehab lab. And in those days, they didn't have anything but treadmills. So what I would do is I'd be in my scrubs and I'd take off my coat and I'd just walk. I'd walk on the treadmill, and it'd be like 2 a.m. I'm walking on the treadmill because I know something's going to happen. It's not even worth trying to grab an hour of sleep or something because, by definition, I'm on call, everything happens. So, but gosh, it felt so good. So, what am I saying? There are ways to de stress, to bring down the inflammation, and to allow you to enhance your own mental resilience and your metabolic resilience. So much of this is how you deal with it, how you deal with it. And, I'll tell you, during my residency, it was a very large university, whatever, a lot of residents in multiple specialty. There were two suicides. And I say that to really be able to emphasize how serious this is. And so I'm saying to everyone out there, women, there are ways, and it may be very difficult at certain times in your life to be able to feel as though you're in control. But the moment you feel that, it's like magical. It transforms you, and it allows you to be able to think about things like food prep, like getting some physical activity. Notice I don't say the E word. I didn't say exercise. I just said physical activity. Get up, become more active. Walking is way underestimated and underappreciated by people. Get outside. I'm a nutcase for eco psychology. And it's interesting. The first studies that were done in yoga and in nature studies, going out in nature, were with cortisol, because you could track what happens to cortisol levels. And that includes the sinusoidal, curves that they were measuring, and how you can correct course.
And I want to get into the not the E word, the activity word, the movement word. I want to get into that and kind of how we treat cortisol, globally. Before we do that, though, I want to just ask one more question. I hear a lot of people, and we do too, talk about saliva testing for cortisol because you're right. Multiple blood tests throughout the day, not something you're going to do at home, but potentially some other kind of what would be considered alternative forms of testing, like saliva, have gotten popular, especially in the functional medicine longevity space. What are your thoughts on saliva for cortisol?
Okay, so one of the things, as I mentioned before, Doug, is that cortisol's on the move. all day. So, what you don't want is one test that gives you one frame for an entire movie. And so you can't interpret that. It's like, well, it was up. Well, maybe it should have been up because it was at 6 in the morning. I don't know. Um, so, if you're going to do something like saliva, and saliva has been validated, so I'm good with that. But you need to do no less than 4 saliva tests at specific times throughout the day. So I would do one first thing in the morning just to kind of make sure that you have your little innate alarm clock working well for you, right? So it should be high. That's a good thing. Then right around noon, right? And like noonish, one-ish. The next one about 5, and then the next one before you hit the sack. And then you can get a picture of what's going on. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, you can start to see the curve. And the test that we use, we don't use it a lot these days, but the test that we used to use a lot it's called a diurnal cortisol test. And
Right.
it has either 4 or 6 points depending
Right.
on what you're measuring. And yeah, you can see the curve, right? You can see the rise and the fall. We also test, we have historically, I don't know if it's still on my panel now, the AM fasting cortisol test, right? Like this single point in time, I've taken it off, and I think it's been added back on so many times to my panel because some people want to see it, but I don't find it helpful because again, like it should be high in the morning, right? Like we want a
Yeah.
response, and I don't know
Yeah.
what's happening later in the day. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up about cortisol testing because that can be done at home. You still have to know how to interpret it, but I do think that can be valuable. And then I also
I
wanted,
would have a functional doctor interpret it. Don't be doing this DIY thing, like doing it yourself. Go to a functional integrative, physician provider, whomever, and have them help you understand what does that mean within the context of your life. What's your lifestyle look like? How can we do tweaks here?
right? No, and it is really helpful, especially when you see either a flat line or you see that rise as they are supposed to be going to bed. I think those are the two most compelling things where you see something is happening later in the day. What are you doing? When are you eating dinner? What are you doing after dinner? What does this look like for you? And then they can see very objectively, ooh, yes, this 3-hour work session I do on my computer before I go to bed is maybe partly responsible for my poor sleep. Partly.
Doug, can I just tell you one small thing? In my laboratory, Dr. Crusoes was working with an extremely rare condition, and one can imagine what a nightmare this is. So these people were brought into the NIH. We take people from all over the world, so we're a clearinghouse. Now these people never have a decrease in cortisol. Okay, they're lacking. There's a problem in the brain at the hypothalamic, region level. All right, so this is a nightmare. These people have never slept. Now I'm going to tell you right now. If you're going, wow, why can't I sleep? Hello, because there's a threshold, and if you get below the threshold of that cortisol, you'll fall asleep. If you're above the threshold, you're alert and you're rocking, and it's not going to work for you. These people live above the threshold. So we came up with a very, totally research, because this is such a rare syndrome. But we came up with a way to be able to tamp down the hypothalamic secretion. And I was there when 2 of them slept for the first time all night. And I just about cried because I don't know who's crying more, them or me, because I was so happy for them. Why am I bringing this up? You want to know why you can't sleep? Your If your cortisol level is too high because you're razzed up, what have you done? We're looking at social media. We just had a rotten phone call with somebody, and it just goes on and on. Sleep is your superpower. And anything you could do to optimize sleep is absolutely life saving. So that's why, this whole issue of cortisol for me was so important because it at the base of it all is the pro-inflammatory, higher than normal stress levels.
Yeah, so true. And there are a lot of tools. We use health coaches in our programs because a lot of this is just sleep hygiene. It's, what are you doing with your life? Like, how do you take these thoughts in your brain and maybe put them on paper? What do you do when you wake up at 2 a.m.? I mean, all there's so many scenarios that it's impossible really as a physician for us to have time to even go through those things. Which is why I love, doing things like this where we can actually say like what we think, because ultimately all of my patients talk to my health coaches. So I want to ask one more question about testing before we move on to the E word. Visceral fat versus subcutaneous fat, body composition. How do you like to help women to understand body composition? What do you find is meaningful? There's a ton of different ways to do it.
Why do I care about body composition? Well, it's very interesting. I came from the world, as you did, of everyone was on a diet, or it was all about weight. It was the almighty scale that never made sense to me. And the reason why is because it's quantity. I get that. I'm cool, and you could crank out a BMI on that one and, come up with that number. But where's the quality? And I didn't understand. So I became a real fanatic about body comp early on, and actually, I'm writing my next book, and it's all about that. It's time to really look at this over the course of a woman's life. I've actually written the textbook chapters on this because I want women to understand that they're not static. If you're not 20 anymore, if you're 50. So what's normal, what's normative, as you course through each decade in life. So Doug, to answer your question, it's all about quality. So what I'm looking at here is, are you preserving your bone? Your bone peaks sometime between the age of 28 to 32 ish. There's a bell shaped curve in there. All right. Did you know that? Bet you didn't. Come on now. Raise your hand if you knew it. Ah, I don't see any hands. Well, that's the gig. All right. Yeah, I know there, Doug's cheating. He's
My
cheating.
hand, my hand.
Yeah, he's handy. And then the other one is like muscle, same thing. Muscle peaks about that time. Now, I'm eliminating elite athletes. I mean, they're kind of in a different world in many respects. The ones who are more muscle bound, et cetera. And so we'll just kind of put them over to the side. I'm just talking mostly to average, wonderful, beautiful women out there, especially. And then what happens to fat? What up with fat already? Like, what's normal and what's not? Well, honey, look at your mother, look at the people in your family. Who do you look like? There's a lot of genetics here in terms of fat distribution. It's not just your mother, it's your father. I'm kind of a perfect compilation of my mother and father. My mother was tall, slender. She never, met a gym. She was always just physically active and lived to be 97. My father was like a walking brick wall. He was a mesomorphic athlete. So I ended up being a tall, mesomorphic athlete. And there you have it. So I looked at my mother, I looked at my father, said, "Oh, okay." And I looked at my fat distribution. I said, and some of this is making sense here. So that's good. But how do you manage fat over the course of a lifetime? Because, honey, it's a moving target. So, fitness, which we're going to get into shortly, fitness will help you equalize that and really put you on a path to a health and well-being outcome, not some I stand on a scale thing. So speaking of scales, what I love to use is I use a bioelectrical impedance. So there are all these terrific scales out there. At the NIH, I used Tanita. I have nothing to do with the company, but Tanita put out much of the equipment we used at the highest level in research. So I kind of like, I'm down with them because they look pretty credible. So when they started coming out with consumer level bioelectrical impedance scales. I was like, I can do that. And then with an app. So the reason why I like the app is because an app will track you over time. It makes sense. So it's like you forget what you were. It's like, some people write it down. They're like OCD and they've got spreadsheets, with the Excel and the rest of it. And other people are like, what the hell? I can't remember what I was. So what I do is I always use that and it'll give you, is it perfect? No. At the Cooper Institute, Ken Cooper is one of my dearest friends. He dunked me underwater with the underwater weighing, which is the most accurate way to get a body composition. It was an interesting experience. Thank God I know how to swim. So, um, outside of that, absent that, I will just use the bioelectrical impedance and I repeat it with the same equipment at the same time like in the day or morning or whatever, so that you can kind of replicate it as best you can. So that works out really well. At
Does
the
Tanita have a home device? I haven't looked at them in a while.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my gosh, they
yeah,
have really good ones.
yeah, so funny story about Tanita. So my wife uses Tanita in her nationwide program and all of her brick and mortars. They use Tanita, and she's PhD RD and is adamant about body composition and actually loves talking about visceral fat. So you two would have a great conversation. But there are a lot of other companies out there, and just so we're not, so we can be brand agnostic. InBody is a big one out there.
Oh
Hume is
yeah.
a newer company. Withings, I know it does a lot of stuff in the space. And the thing that I like about these devices is that they're not very expensive. They may not be particularly accurate, is something I want to get out there, depending on the company. I think Tanita probably is, my wife thinks it's the most accurate. Um, but even if they're not accurate, as long as they are, or precise, as long as they are continuing to measure precisely you over time, it's the trend that you're looking for, right? So the difference between accuracy and precision, you want it to be able to measure precisely you over time and get that trend. And I think all of these devices probably do that. Would you agree with that?
Oh, there's no question. It's all relative. That's what I tell everyone. Did you choose a particular brand? Because to your point, there are plenty of great brands out there now. I just only used Tanita because I was a researcher and I was used to it. That's all, just like your wife. But there's plenty of good ones. So whatever one you chose, stick with it. So, if you see a change, it's relative to that one. And don't be, hopping from one apparatus to another because, it's going to be different, right?
Yeah. I have a bunch of these home devices because people, companies will send them to me to trial and they want to partner on the podcast and whatever. And so I probably have in my bathroom right now like 4 or 5 different devices. And I can tell you that if I stand on one and then stand on another, my body fat percentage will range anywhere from 6% to 21% on these devices. That tells you the range of accuracy. But I will tell you also that all of them will continue to give me that same number over time. So again, it doesn't really matter which one you use as long as you use
It's
the same
relative.
one. Yeah, use the same one, and then stick with it. The other thing that I've noticed too, there's been a turn in the marketplace of having a handle that goes along with it to measure both upper and lower body. Have you looked into this at all?
I have. Again, it goes to the same point, and that is how accurate is that. So if you're going to buy one with the handle, they're all over the place now. It's sort of like the latest bling in body composition. It's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. Another way to do this, just saying, is to get a DEXA. And so at the NIH, you love this. So when I was working with the Cushing's patients, I said, you know, I've heard that this DEXA could be very, very helpful, but you need a certain software program. It's not the same DEXA software program as when you get your bones measured for your spine and for your hip. If you're a woman out there, you know that whole gig. So you have to have a separate program software. So I was talking to one of the radiologists at the NIH. He goes, I think we have a DEXA down in the basement. And I went, what? And so I went with him down the basement, not kidding. I've got more stories. So there's this beautiful new DEXA with the algorithm for body comp. Okay. And it's in plastic. No one had ever touched it. I'm like, come on down. And so we got that baby up to upstairs in radiology. And I started DEXing everybody. Someone walked by me, I'm going to DEXA you. I wanted to see everyone's body comp. I wanted to understand what this looked like. And down to a gram, I could tell you how much muscle and fat that you had, and its distribution. You could see these extraordinary pictures. All you have to do is Google it. Anybody can, and just say Google DEXA body comp. Now, guess what? There are all kinds of DEXA companies out there, and also functional and integrative medical practices where they offer DEXA. And, it's nominal. It's like $200, maybe $300, sometimes less. It depends upon whatever. You have to, hopefully it's a great machine like a Hologic, which is, one of the top of the line. And you have the right algorithm. And then it's really cool to follow it over time. It's like, oh, that's my body. and you get a chance to be able to, really monitor what's going on with the quality of your body. I'm so into that. So if someone walks up to me, I don't want to know what your weight is. First of all, I'm an expert. I can look at you and pretty much guess. So don't even try, dancing around that one. But what I really want to know is like, how's that lean body mass going? How's that muscle mass going? And I'm even much less, worried about the fat part. I would like to understand, where you are in terms of establishing a good muscular foundation, building upon that and maintaining that. All of that is important. And then clearly managing your fat mass as well. Notice how I'm talking about this. I never said the word weight. Not once. I'm talking about metabolic health. This is a different way of looking at all this now. We're like, talking about weight and diets and all this silliness. It's so last year. So
It's last decade. But I tell you what,
I
Pam,
know.
there's something so for those of us, and if you're new to the show, you've probably not heard me talk about my history. Pam knows this. And so I was in the ballet space. So clearly, weight oriented, aesthetics oriented. So I used to, and I still do for the most part, weigh myself every day. I still do. But now I do it on a body comp scale. And I look at the weight and I'm still tied to that number. And that's just my, decades of training, right? But I'm more tied to the muscle mass. I'm more interested in following that curve. So to that end, Pam, how often should someone do this, especially if they have a home device? There's some language around and talk around, doing it too much. Am I overdoing it by doing it every day? I would say probably. But what is the sweet spot in there? What do you think?
Okay, I'm going to go directly to women. Okay. And with women, this could be a horrible trigger for them. And you see, women have a tortured relationship with the scale. Men less so. It's hysterical. When I was the chief medical correspondent for Discovery Television, and we had this show called The Body Challenge, and it was a national show, and we shot it in LA, and we had a really great time. And this is what would happen on television. It's reality television. On television, a guy from a family, because we work with families, he just stepped right up on the scale. He'd go, look down at the number and go, wow, I'm fat, and that's all he would say. It's like, and meanwhile, all the women are horrified, whatever. And he said, well, I guess I got to fix this. And then he just would go off and say, what's the least amount I need to do to be able to get this sucker, move the needle here. All right. What do women do? The women stood up there and they wouldn't even get on the scale at first. They go, can I take my watch off? I'm not kidding. Can I take, and another one was like, my earrings. I've got to take my earrings and my watch off. And how about this necklace? And I'm just like, oh my God, this is not happening. And then they would get up, but they wouldn't look. So they turn around. They go, do you mind if I just turn around? I don't want to see. And this is what happens. And, I'm laughing about this, but I'm laughing with you. because been there, done that. It's like it's a very different trigger. It's a different journey for women when it comes to body composition. You shouldn't really do it more than once a month. Body composition, because it takes a while to be able to generate, especially for women, changes in your muscle mass, because it takes us longer to be able to do that. And then the same thing with the fat mass, if you're really hitting the nutrition appropriately. So, the body composition is one thing. You know what I do instead? I developed my own little thing, Doug, and you'll love it. It's my world famous, infamous clothesometer. Okay, so you grab that pair of jeans, that little Hummer that just will not zip up, but you'll probably be there within about maybe 5 pounds ish, maybe 10, 5 to 10, depends upon where you are right now. All right. You put that Hummer on once a week. And then let's put it this way, all together now, if you could zip it up now, what do you think happened? Your body is course correcting, and it just makes more sense, to people when they do that. And then also with body composition, you're seeing gentler numbers. Okay. So it's not like you weigh 255 pounds. It's like, oh my God, it's a horror show. No. Instead, you see something like, your muscle mass or your lean body mass, however, the bioelectrical thing is calibrating this. All right. The number is 75 pounds. I like it. It's a gentle number. The total amount of fat is a gentle number. You don't get this big brr, 250. So this is why you have to play with psychology here so you can follow it appropriately. I have people I've worked with who've done nothing but their clothesometer for a long time until they felt stable enough mentally to be able to handle the number thing, because they've been bingers. They've maybe had eating disorders. I wrote my, last book, The Hunger Fix, about food and addiction, and they have very tough, addictive eating behaviors per the Yale Food Addiction Scale. And so, they're not going to just scale hop for you. Not going to do it. It's a different experience, and the mass majority of women have something like this. Not everyone, but have something like this. Physical activity helps to neutralize so much of this.
Well, yeah. So let's get into that. And before you do, I just want to say, my approach is my approach, and it works for me. I love the data, and I do find too for men that are very gung ho and love data, then they'll get on that thing every day, right? And they're going to look at that number and they're going to send me a screenshot of it and say, "Yeah, look, it went down by 0.1 pounds." And that's fine. And I have some women that do that too. But for the most part, my patient population is older women with osteoporosis who have been on a diet most of their life. That's my population. And you're right, they don't want to stand on the scale. So we have to find that middle ground. We have to find that middle ground that they're comfortable with, that they'll stick with. And it could be, I like the clothesometer, I like that term. But it could just be less frequent. It could be only looking at one number. You stand on it, you take a screenshot, you send it to your coach, and they look at it. And, there's a lot of ways around it, right? So it does have to work for you, and we have to be sensitive to backgrounds for sure. So then let's get into the fix. Let's get into what solves this problem of visceral fat, of adiposity overall, inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, all the things we talk about. How do you like to fix it?
It's interesting. Doug, when I was at the NIH, I had a very special patient, and this was in my very first book where I showed the CAT scans of her belly. So she had Cushing syndrome, and I told you they came from all over the world. This is my first big awakening to what happened with physical activity. So her name was Ariana, and this was all okay to share because she thought her story was absolutely amazing, which it was. So I was on the 10th floor of the clinical center of the NIH. And we would admit these patients. They would come in for either neurosurgery, we'd remove the tumor from their pituitary gland, or in her case, her adrenal glands. She had a very rare form of this. So she was just squirting it out. And I looked at her labs just in preparation for meeting with her and doing the pre-ops and everything, because I'm going to go into the operating room with her and collect her fat. I became known as the fat doctor. Not quite sure I was happy with that. But anyway, so I looked at her numbers and I called my colleagues. I said, I have never seen cortisol numbers this high. This is unfriggin' believable. And so in my mind, I figured she was she was a gigantic pumpkin, because they all have this huge belly. They all look pregnant. The men look pregnant and the women, and little skinny legs, skinny arms, because that level of stuff was just rotting their, the rest of their body. So I went to her room. I was told she had arrived. She wasn't there. Bed was made, and suitcase was there. No body. Where did my patient go? So I went to the nurse, one of my favorite nurses, and I said, so where is she? And then she smiled wryly and she said, go to the stairwell. I said, stairwell? And now, mind you, I'm on the 10th floor. And then there's another 4 floors below that where we had a parking garage inside the clinical center. So it was 14 floors. And these were the old fashioned steps. So they're really high and it's a double step thing. And it's a mess. I mean, when you made it to the 10th floor, it was like, you won the Olympics. So she said, go to the stairwell, just yell her name. I said, are you out of your mind? I look like an idiot. She goes, no, I'm not kidding you. Just go to the. So I did. Ariana. And I could hear a little voice going, yes. I said, hi, it's Dr. Peeke. I'm up here on the 10th floor. Where the hell are you? She goes, oh, I'm down here on the 2nd floor. Do you want me now? And I thought, okay. So up she came. And I was waiting for her. I was waiting to see this large pumpkin. What did I see? I saw a beautiful young woman with no big belly. She had the chipmunk cheeks. She had the buffalo hump. These are all the classic signs of cortisol through the ceiling. But I looked at her belly, and for all intent and purposes, it looked fairly normal, fairly normal. I mean, she didn't look overweight at all. She obviously looked off because of the ruddy complexion and the rest of it. So I just couldn't, I was in shock. And she started laughing. And she said, they all laugh and they all freak out when they see me. And I'm going to tell you why. Because you see, I'm an athlete. She's a track and field athlete. And the only way she was diagnosed, because high levels of cortisol rot your bones, they literally leave them moth eaten. So she was about ready to take off on a track meet. I think it was like maybe the 200 or the 400. And as she pulled away off those things, that you put your foot on, okay, as she did that, she broke every single metatarsal in both feet. They all cracked. And so that was weird. The radiologist, God bless him, gave us a call saying, we got a hit. He said, nothing does this but a rare disease like Cushing's. And they did a 24-hour urine and it was literally through the ceiling. This poor thing was just putting it out. And so I said, well, what's up with you and not having the big belly? And she said, oh, that's easy. You see, I stumbled into it. And she was only in her 20s. She's very, very smart. She said, I had this horrible feeling I was stressed out. Remember what I said about being on call? I had this horrible feeling I was stressed out. And the only thing that gave me relief was moving my body. Okay. And so she said, I can't stop moving my body. So she had been up and down that staircase about 20 times by the time I got to her. And because of her physical activity, she never put on anywhere near the level of fat or visceral fat. Do you see the lesson here? So when you're stressed out and you're running around like a crazy person, right? And you feel like there's no relief, physical activity at some level especially if you could find a natural environment. I don't know anybody who's ever taken a walk in the park and said, that was the worst experience of my whole freaking life. No, it's like, why do you feel so good? It's because your cortisol levels have now begun to normalize, right, to a healthy level, etc. And now you're able to kind of do your thing. So this is why physical movement, mobility in your life is critical, essential, and life saving. And you and I, Doug, are both, people who are athletes. We've been athletic, for years and years. I'm a senior Olympic triathlete, and I finished my marathon career. Thank you, God. Excuse me, but I just got that baby over with. But we have a holy respect for moving our bodies. You don't have to be an athlete at all. We just happen to have leaned into that over the course of our lifetime. And so it's important now. I don't care how old you are. Seriously, I'm with the Senior Olympics now. I've gotten them in with the American College of Sports Medicine, where I'm on their board, and I've got everybody kind of now woven together. We're all happy. And when you look at the Senior Olympics, these are people 50 and over, average age 68. What you find is that there are a truckload of them who never got serious about, doing something. I don't care if it's softball, basketball, badminton, pickleball, and all the rest of it. I mean, they have world class masters track and field and swim athletes. So this is a wild and crazy bunch. Some of them never did anything until they were 50, 60, even 70 years old. And so it's never too late to just become more physically active, because it'll save your life. I wanted to bring to your attention an incredibly cool article that had just come out. And this was an article that challenged the belief that 1 minute, as it were, of vigorous activity um, had what kind of metabolic effect, right? So it was one of those 1 minute equals, 2 minutes of moderate exercise and all the rest of it. Well, as it turns out, in this new study that was recently published, to give you an idea of how powerful it is to just get up and actually push yourself, challenge yourself for no more than 1 minute. 1 minute. So, vigorous exercise for you and me, Doug, may be very different than it is for someone who has been totally sedentary and they're 20 years younger than we are. Okay. So, it's all relative. So, if you look at 1 minute of vigorous. So, what do I mean by vigorous? All right, girlfriends, you see that hill over there? You're outdoors. Do not run from it. Stop that. Stop that right now. Do not break out in a sweat, a little anxiety. No, instead, attack it. Grizzly bear, grizzly mom. All right, up you go. And the whole thing takes like a minute. Big deal. All right. 1 minute of vigorous exercise like that, right, reduces your all-cause mortality, meaning any cause, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, right? And it is equal to 4 minutes of moderate exercise. So you could just kill it off. Boom, there you go. We used to think the ratio was 1 to 2. Doug, you and I were trained with 1 to 2. It was like, okay, 1 minute vigorous is equal to 2 minutes of We were dead wrong. It turns out we underestimated by upwards of 10x. Oh my gosh. So here's some more really good ones. Type 2 diabetes. Okay. And how many people have that out there? How about like close to, 90 million? All right. 1 minute of vigorous exercise. Get your little type 2 diabetic ass right up that hill. There you go. all right, is equal to 9.4 minutes of moderate. So you want to, crank out 10 minutes of, doing moderate, or do you want to just sort of like attack it, and do it? So all of a sudden, everything was shook up, and the ratios are no longer 1 to 2. It's like 1 to 9, 1 to 5. The whole metabolic syndrome. 5 minutes of moderate exercise, 1 minute of vigorous. So just 1 minute, and you do it anytime you want to. I know you and I do it. You tell me, Doug, how do you do it throughout the day?
Yeah, so I this is something that was interesting when I made my shift out of the operating room, out of the hospital into, my home office, right? I became a desk jockey and I actually became very sedentary. And I noticed that, I used to have to do a lot of activity throughout the day. Operating room is actually pretty physical. Running around the hospital is pretty physical. Um, and so I had to become very intentional. I had to really protect my movement time. So I have an hour and a half in the morning before I start my day. And in that hour and a half, I will either on a resistance day, I will do heavy intensity, high intensity resistance training, and that's about 3 days a week. And then on the alternate days, I will do either some very like low, like not even moderate, like low level, just movement. And this could be on a bike, it could be walking. We have hills in our neighborhood. It could be walking outside, something to make me slightly out of breath, but not that much. And then I will do only one time a week. I will do high intensity interval training, but that I think has so much more benefit for me than ever did the moderate to moderate high intensity, not high intensity like you're saying, but moderate to high, like running, my runner friends, right? Like running, like cycling. I used to be a big cyclist where I would go out and I would ride for, 2 hours with a heart rate of 150, 160. And what I found is in those scenarios, I was so inflamed, constantly hungry. I didn't feel good. And actually, I got fatter, I think, because of the stress of the activity, right?
There
What's,
you go.
what's beautiful about the high intensity short intervals is that it's a totally different response. Even though you might have the same effect in this study of the decline in all cause mortality, the actual metabolic difference, though, is quite different. The inflammatory difference is very different between what, like running at a relatively good clip versus high intensity interval training.
I just absolutely love it. And, when I say high intensity interval training, or intense, increased intense, I'm not saying, you join the Olympics for 1 minute and then you're off. No, it's all relative. It's all relative. So, as you know, we have zones of activity. And what you're talking about is you were, when you were doing like the run thing and all the rest of it, relative to you, you know, it was more like a zone 2 to zone 3 kind of experience, which is great. What what this is closer to a zone 4, and you don't have to reach zone 5. But just a zone 4, what does that mean? That means you're not chatting with your best friend at that moment. You are like rocking it. Okay, you got 1 minute to rock it. You could do this on anything. You could step up on an elliptical, a treadmill, a rower, a Peloton especially, and you could just crank it. You know what I do? Okay, I'll tell you my hack. Here it comes. No, no, no. So I'm a kettlebell queen. All right. I love the kettlebell. Why? I could, I have my own gym. Thank you, COVID. So I never trusted. I'm a member of Equinox, and Equinox shut down for a year and a half. I'm like, no, um, we're just going to have our own gym now. And so I have a very comprehensive gym. So what I do is I just, I grab a specific kettlebell, so relative to me, and I keep it in my office. And when I'm doing like what I'm doing now, which is, in the studio standing, which I love, I can't stand sitting. So I stand and, I kind of do my thing. But what I need is I need to have these little breaks, to your point. So what I'll do is I'll just look at my little friend, the kettlebell, and I'll do it. Now, if anyone has ever done kettlebell, I like to do the deadlift especially. To me, that's like, whoa, okay. Swings are fantastic, whatever you like to do. But you know what I love about it? It's portable. I can take it into any damn room just so long as it's got a good flooring. Break something. Um, and that's it. I'll just walk over and I'll do that. And
How
huh?
heavy is your kettlebell? Just curious for that.
Well, I'm preparing for a little competition, so my kettlebell's 50.
That's a
Um,
real kettlebell. That's a
yeah,
real kettlebell.
that's a little cast iron nightmare. So, but again, it's relative to me. I've been at this for decades. People, when people say, "Oh, I want to look like you, I want to be like you," and yeah, that's special. You want to go and grunt it out with me, and work at it for year after year after year, rinse and repeat, do it again, do it again. That's what it requires. It's the same thing that's required if you want to be a good mom, if you want to be successful in your career. It's hard work, rinse and repeat, but it's got magnificent rewards and joy. So you got to have a balance of both. So I just use the kettlebell to be able to help me with my own, risk of mortality as I go through. Now, Doug, you and I have talked about how comprehensive we have to be. So you're talking about strength. Okay, strong arms, girlfriends. All right, strong body. That's what you want. Okay. This thing about the 4-letter word thin is if anyone called me thin, bitch slap. Okay. That's it. Don't ever call me that. I'm fit. I want to be called fit and strong. You give me those two words and you make my day. And that should also make your day as well. And when you aim for that, by doing exactly what Doug just said, I also lift heavier 3 times a week. And then in between, I do all kinds of fun little things, playing in my sandbox, just to kind of what I love to call stoking the fire so it never goes out as best you can. And so it's important to have the strength, endurance. I mean, you could do the endurance with walking. You don't have to be fancy schmancy here. Just do it consistently. Get on out there, walk. Well, as one of my friends said, walk your dog, even if you don't have one. And, and there you have it. Then you want stretching, you want balance and flexibility. All of these are critical. And then, honey, let me tell you something. Once you hit 50, right, and beyond, boy, are you going to be happy because you laid a powerful foundation for, to your point, Doug, strong bones, enough muscle to rock and roll with, and you manage your fat as a consequence. And then you get prepared for your 60s when you have one of the first age related changes in body composition. And that is, I don't care if you're a master's athlete, a former Olympian, everyone drops some level of muscle mass. Is completely age related. I won't get into the origins of that. Just trust me on this one. So if you're starting from a high level, then it's a nothing burger. Now, it'll obviously affect your elite athletic performance, but who the hell cares about that if you're not an elite athlete? um, but if you don't walk into your 60s, with enough muscle mass, strong bone, all the rest of it, then you're in trouble, because one of the things you want to avoid is frailty. There's no return from frailty. That's a bad thing. And so you need to be able to have that strong foundation.
There is an important area that I want to hit before I run out of your time, which is, you've done a lot of work over the last, decades, right? For women, you've written books, you've been all over the place. You are constantly talking about these great foundational tools and ideas, and the way you talk about them through story is fantastic. If we were to look forward, if we were to look forward over the next 10, 20 years, the reason why we created this podcast, this Health 3.0 podcast, is with the idea that we need to create, all of us together who are part of this process of changing our healthcare system for the better. If you could change, let's just say one thing, maybe two, one or two things over the next 10 to 20 years, if you had absolute control, you had the keys to the kingdom and an unlimited budget that could impact your audience the way that you would want to see them impacted, what would those things be?
Okay. One of the first things is easy access to all the tools they need for physical activity. Right now, it's a jungle and it's not fair. I want every person, especially women, to have some easy access to the support system that they need in terms of tools and guidance to be able to maintain a body that is supposed to last a lifespan of 88 years plus. I mean, I'm just saying 88 just because of the CDC numbers and the rest of it. But, you're seeing much further. I want you to have the best health span, and I want your health span to equal your lifespan. Okay. So the first thing is accessibility to those tools. And that's within the purview of physical activity. If you look at nutrition, the same thing. We have absolutely got to have better access for everyone to whole foods, to untainted produce, and to a support system to be able to help people, not just women, but to be able to help people create a nutritional foundation that they can live with that's delicious and diverse and something that will help support their physical activity because one goes hand in hand with the other. You cannot do one without the other. It is impossible. So those are foundational. And I'm going to sneak in a third.
Sure. Go ahead.
Sleep.
Sleep.
Absolutely. Find a way, remember the de-stressing and the rest of it. And guess what? If you're eating better, and if your physical activity is better, I put money on it because the research is already there. Your sleep will be enhanced. And there's plenty of technology out there. I'm wearing my little Aura ring. Again, I have nothing to do with Aura, but it's just one of the best little technological developments around. But you could wear a Whoop, and there's plenty of other devices out there. But you're going to be able to allow yourself to decrease the risk of dementia, Alzheimer's, and enhance cognitive performance.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I mean, those are the three of our pillars right there, in access and figuring it out. So thank you so much for that, Pam. Well, we didn't hit on many topics that I actually wanted to talk about. So we're definitely going to have to do this again in the future. Maybe later in 2026, we can find some time to get together in person this time. So I think we should plan on doing that.
I think that there's nothing that would make me happier. And kudos to you, Doug, for offering this opportunity to be able to share all of this knowledge. Basically, like you and I are hanging out and people are listening in with the Health 3.0. I think it's such a great program. I really feel that all of us as communicators within this field are trying to do the best we can to touch people's lives in a beneficial way with little nuggets. If someone walked away after an hour and a half of listening to us hanging out with one or two nuggets that changed their life, little low hanging fruit where they said, yeah, I can do that, then you know something? You and I and Health 3.0 were very successful.
I couldn't agree more. Little hinges that swing big doors. All
There
right.
you
Thanks so
go.
much, Pam. I really appreciate your time. We'll do this again soon.
This is wonderful. Thank you.
That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your attention. Remember that this is Health 3.0, where precision meets purpose and healthcare remembers its humanity.